Hello and welcome. My name is Angela Davis and I'm the 4am quilter. And if you've never been to my channel before, welcome. Hope you enjoyed the video. And if you are been to my channel before and you've seen me before, you haven't seen me for a while, and this is the reason why. This is the beginning of a series that I'm calling the 2-color 2-block quilt series. And what I'm going to show you today in this video is my process of how I put this together. I'm going to give you some figures on the number of cuts and the number of units and how I broke down the block to create the pattern. And I'm going to give you some problem solving that I had to do along the way in regard to the color combination and the fabric. So join me while I share all of that with you today. So the first thing I did when I decided to begin this project was I had to choose a pattern. So I went to my regular bookshelf where I have many vintage patterns. You know that's a thing with me. And I chose this one by Maggie Malone, 120 patterns for traditional patchwork quilts. And the pattern I chose, I broke the block down into workable sections. So here is the pattern that I chose, and you'll notice that the pattern is broken up into a grid, so there's small squares dividing the entire pattern. So what I did was I found what I considered to be repeats. And you'll notice that this square here is repeated in each corner. It's also repeated on this interior corner here. Okay, so that means these 4 corners are on the outside. They're also on the inside corners. Okay. The next section that I noticed was this unit here. That is one patch, one single patch. There's 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. Okay. Right here is a flying geese unit, and there's 4 of those, and I break those down into 4 sections, so that you have one flying geese unit here, one flying geese unit here, one here. So there's 4 of them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 that create that, that create that design. I didn't realize I was pushing that over. So basically, I broke it down into individual units. So I have the 4 corners, and then the 4 interior corners. I have a solid square here, 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 that's also repeated on the middle and the bottom. I have a flying geese unit here, 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 and here. And then right here is one square with 4 triangle corners. Okay? So, since I decided to break it down in that manner, I had to decide how big do I want the finished block to be. Now their finished block in their description is 15 inches, which means each one of these little individual squares would have to finish at 1.5 inches, and I did not want that. I wanted my little squares to finish at 2 inches. Okay? Which will give me a finished size of 20 inches. So, within this corner unit, I have a solid red, a solid gray, and 2 half square triangles that make up that corner unit. Okay. Here is one background unit, and these are all going to be gray 4.5 inch cut squares. My flying geese unit has 4 flying geese in it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's going to be 2 with a red background with 2 gray corners and 2 with a gray background with 2 red corners. And then there's going to be 1 center square. Okay, and that's how I broke up the block to create the pattern. And this is block A. Block B is the same as block A, except I dropped out elements from block A to create block B. So block B, I kept the far 4 corners, I kept the center square, and I kept 1 flying geese unit on each side to create that star in the center. And then I did all the rest in the background. Okay, so I'm going to move you again. Block A has 4 corner units on the outside, 4 inner corners on the interior, has a flying geese unit here, 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 and here. It has 1 center block, okay, that has 4 corners. Okay, so what I did was I decided to start with my outside corners, and I decided to create my half square triangles first. Okay, so this is what I did. I have 5 block A's in my entire quilt because my quilt is 3 blocks across by 3 blocks down, and block A has 8 corner units, and within the corner unit there's 2 half square triangles, there's 1 gray 2.5 inch cut square and 1 red 2.5 inch cut square. Okay, so that means that if I have 8 of those corner units in block A, 8 times 5 is 40. I need 40 of my corner units, okay, which means I'm going to need 80 half square triangles for my block A, and I'm going to need 40 2.5 inch cut gray squares and 40 2.5 inch cut red squares for my corner unit. Okay, now for my flying geese, for my regular plain square I need 8 4.5 inch squares cut. For my regular plain squares I need 8 of them for block A, and since there's 5 blocks I need 40 4.5 inch cut gray squares, okay, for total for the entire quilt. To continue on, I have 8 red flying geese units, 8 gray flying geese units, and if I have 8 red flying geese units in 1 block and I have 5 blocks, I'm going to need 40 red flying geese units, and the same for my gray. I need 8 gray flying geese units for 1 A block, and I have 5 of them, so 5 times 8 is 40. So I need 40 gray flying geese units, which means I'm going to need 40 red triangles cut at 2.5 inches by 40 inches, and I'm going to need 40 gray triangles cut at 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches to create my flying geese, and each one of those has the opposite color corner. So I'm going to need 80 gray 2.5 inch cut squares for each red triangle, and for each gray triangle I'm going to need 80 2.5 inch cut squares for those rectangles to create the corners. I'm giving you all this at once, I understand, it's a lot, but I really wanted to break it down for you. The center is 1 4.5 inch cut red square with 4 2.5 inch cut gray squares, okay? And since we need 5 A blocks, I need 5 of the 4.5 inch red centers, and I'm going to need 20 2.5 inch squares to create the center block. a center square. And I know that's a lot, but I created block A first. Once you have all of this finished, it's all a matter of sewing and putting it together, okay? When I started out to do this block, I had an idea of threads, always finding threads. I had an idea of how much prep work was going to be involved to make the quilt. And I knew this was going to be some time invested into make this quilt, but I really wanted to make this quilt for you all. I was really excited when I got the idea to start a series called the 2-color 2-block quilt, and I was really excited to do this pattern. I've been wanting to do this pattern for a while. I had a lot of my red. I had almost 4 yards of red when I started out. I already had that in my stash. The gray, my original gray, this one that has those beautiful Chinese characters in it, calligraphy, I don't know what alphabet, I'm not sure what they call that, but it's beautiful. I found that at the thrift store, and I had almost 2.5 yards. Now, I made some mistakes along the way in that I ran out of the gray, and since I got it at the thrift store, I couldn't go back and buy more. So I substituted the darker gray, which is what you see here in block B. Here. And I felt that the darker gray pulled out the dark gray of that calligraphy, those symbols. I had enough red until I got to the end. I had to substitute 2 strips in a different red. And I'm okay with that. Since I was making this for myself, I just decided that I would go ahead and substitute because I was at a point where I was pretty far along with it, and I just felt like at this point I didn't want to start all over from scratch with all new fabric. So I'm suggesting you buy about 5 yards of the main color, which is the red, and approximately 4 yards of the secondary color, which is gray. If you decide to pursue this quilt, it's a lot. It really is. However, it's not difficult. It's all straight line sewing. So with that being said, the method that I use for creating that many half square triangles, let me grab my pencil. I was taught many years ago in one of my first classes in quilt making. And basically, what I did was I needed a total of 112 half square triangles for the quilt. And if I were to cut a square of fabric in the red and the gray and put them right sides together and draw a line down the center diagonally and stitch on both sides, that gives me 2 half square triangles, okay? That's a lot of individual cutting and a lot of individual drawings. So what I did was I took 2 pieces of fabric in the red and the gray and I put them right sides together. I pressed them very well. And I decided that I needed 56 squares to make 112 because half of 112 is 56. Now, if I were to make just 2 half square triangles with one of those squares, you have to think about your finished size. And I needed my finished size to be 2 inches. So in order to cut that square to get a 2-inch finished half square triangle, I need to add 1 inch. So those squares had to be 3 inches square. Okay? So what I did was, let's say that this color arrangement right here, that this represents my fabric. Okay? So if I need 56 squares, because each square creates 2 half square triangles, okay, and 56 plus 56 is 112, and I need them to be 3 inches square, I need 7, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I need 7 squares across by 8 squares down because 7 times 8 is 56, and each one of these squares has to be 3 inches. So what I did was, let's say this yellow represents the gray, and the red underneath is the red, and I lay them right sides facing, iron them, pin them in the 4 corners. Okay. I'm going to have enough fabric to give me 3 times 7. 3 inches times 7 is 21, and 3 inches times 8 is 24. So let's say I cut these squares 26 inches so that I have a little bit of extra space all the way around. So let's say I have 2 pieces of fabric at 26 inches square, and I'm going to draw a large square that's going to be 21 inches across by 24 inches down. And then I'm going to draw lines 3 inches across, and then lines 3 inches across the opposite direction. Okay? These represent my individual squares. All right? So that's 56 squares. Now, I can write on my fabric with a permanent pen so that I can see, because all these lines are cut lines. They will not come through on your fabric. Once I did that, I drew cross lines like this. Now, my squares aren't perfect, but when I measured and when I did this on my fabric, those squares were perfect because I was using my long ruler. So what I did was I drew lines diagonally across, and then I took this to my sewing machine and I sewed a 1/4 inch on either side of that diagonal line all the way across. Took it to my ironing board, ironed it, and then I cut these rows down and across. Okay? And that's how I create multiple half square triangles when I have a project that's this large. And I only do the grid method if I have like more than a dozen or so. So I lined up my 3-inch mark with that first line. 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to draw a line. And I'm going to do that all the way across. 2-pound weight. Got it at the thrift store. Love it. Love it. It works wonderful when you're cutting fabric using your long ruler grid, or if you're drawing lines like I'm doing now. It's fabulous. Now I'm going to line up my 3-inch mark with that drawn line. And I'm going to draw my line. I'm going to go all the way across. I created my square grid, and then I drew diagonal lines going in one direction at the points. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it on the sewing machine, and at each line I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch on either side of those diagonals. So imagine this being one square. There's my diagonal line, and I'm going to sew on either side of it to create my half square triangle. I'll press it, cut down that line, open it up, trim it down, and that will be, this would create, if I just had 2 pieces of fabric here, this would create 2 half square triangles. Well, instead of cutting each square individually and drawing these lines individually, I've created an entire grid, and I'm going to sew all my diagonals on the machine now. I'm holding my thread. going to keep on sewing. Okay, I'm lining it up. Put my weight down. That is such a valuable tool. Truly is. Slide this down. Okay, now my outside is all cut. So now I'm going to start slicing rows and then the opposite rows, okay? Okay. I'm going to line these up 2 at a time. And then cut them. I'm cutting the squares out. There it is. Now, I'm going to do one now. I'm going to trim off the dog ears. I'm going to iron it. When you do it this way, the tip ends up getting sewn. But all you have to do is grab that top fabric, pull it away from the bottom, and then just tear it apart. It comes right apart because there's only a few stitches there. And I'm pressing toward the gray. Now that we have a half square triangle, when I trim these, I'm going to trim them at 2.5 inches because this is the actual half square triangle that we created. And when we put it into the block itself to sew it, we need the 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Okay, does that make sense? So to create a half square triangle, all of those half square triangles, you must add 1 inch to the finished size, because when you're creating them, you need to allow for this angle. Okay, but now that we have a half square triangle, it's like, okay, now we have a half square triangle. I'm going to trim it to 2.5 inches because that gives me my 1/4 inch seam allowance, because this is ready to be sewn into the block. Okay, I mean, you know, after I trim it. Okay, I just want to sort of reiterate that a little bit. The flying geese unit we're going to work on next. There's 4 flying geese within the unit. There's 2 red with the gray points, and there's 2 gray with the red points. There's the red, and there's the gray. That's what we're going to work on next. Everyone does a flying geese a little different. There's many techniques, okay? I'm going to show you one technique that I'm using for this quilt. And what I'm doing is I have 2 rectangles because I'm making 2 types of flying geese. I'm making one in the red background and one in the gray. These are going to be finished 2 inches by 4 inches. So my cut size has to be 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches, okay? Whatever size this dimension is, all right, that's the size of your square, okay, which is going to create the corner triangle, all right? So this is 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. So this square is 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it on that one end, okay? I'm not drawing a line, and I'm not folding it, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the outer corner. I'm going to put it in, set the presser foot down. Now I'm going to start a little bit farther in because I'm going to do a couple back stitches at that corner. Okay, but what I'm doing is I'm lining up that point with this point, and I have a line right here that's naturally on my table, right here. It's right here. Okay, so let me see if I can get you in. It's right here. There's a groove right there. So what I'm doing is, as I stitch, I'm following this point on that line. Up. Okay. I'm following this point on that line. Now, as soon as my square gets off the line, I'm not watching the needle, I'm watching my point. If I'm watching my point, I'm going to line up that stitch with that point, because what I'm doing is I'm not watching the needle, I'm watching the destination. And if you do that, you're going to get a perfect line every time. Measure it one more time. There it is. Two and a half inches by 4.5 inches. Okay, now I've showed you how to do one flying geese. Now I'm going to show you how to assembly line sew the flying geese, meaning I'm going to feed one right after the other, okay? So in order to do that, I need to get my first one started. And that first one, I like to backstitch a little bit because that corner can end up, you know, down in my machine, and I don't want that. All right, so as soon as I get to the end of that point, all right, I'm gonna pull it out and I'm gonna feed the next one in. Okay, now I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to move it over and I'm going to feed the second side through so that I can make those second triangles. as this is a great way to add another design element to your work. You can add these to the border. I've done that before. Or you can add these extra triangles and start a baby quilt. There's just a lot you can do with them. And this way, all of this fabric in your flying geese gets used. And I got this idea from Eleanor Burns. She has her show and her line of books and patterns called Quilt in a Day. If you're not sure about where to set up your presser foot for this next triangle, you're just going to line it up so that this edge is approximately 1/4 inch from this edge, and that way you have your 1/4 inch from this edge to the line for the new triangle, and then you'll be fine. See? Point to point, every one. Trust yourself, it'll work. It'll work. And I'm just cutting where these threads are. See? Let me show you. You can see that, can't you? Okay, so I'm cutting in between the sewing lines like that. And then I'm cutting that thread to disconnect it from the piece in front. And there's the little one. I'm setting that in a box. And there's the beginning of my flying geese unit. So I'm just going to continue on. Oops. All right, now I'm going to take these over to the ironing board, press these out, and then sew the other side on. I've already sewed one side of my triangle, my square over to my flying geese. I'm going to show you how I iron 2 at a time. Turn it, turn the second one, hold it down. Let the steam do its work. There we go. Do 2 more. Why iron 1 when you can do 2? Save yourself some time wherever you can. I have block A all laid out. Have it all laid out. And I'm gonna sew it. I'm gonna sew it one section at a time. So I'm gonna do this 4 patch, then this 4 patch, then this 4 patch. Okay. Then I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna do this 4 patch, this 4 patch. I'm gonna do it in patches of 4. This is a 2 patch, this is a 2 patch. This is a 2 patch, this is a 2 patch. My center is done. This is a 2 patch, this is a 2 patch. Then I'm going to go back. This is a 4 patch, this is a 2 patch, this is a 4 patch, this is a 4 patch, this is a 2 patch, and this is a 4 patch. And then once I have those sections done, I can start doing rows. Okay. Let me show you block B. This is block B. So block B has the 4 corner units, it has the center unit, and it has 4 flying geese units to create the star. And then everything else is just background. So the B block I created by dropping out elements from the A block to create the secondary block. Okay. So now I'm going to give you the figures for the B block. There's 4 B blocks in the entire quilt. There's 4 corner units, just like in block A. Each unit has 2 half square triangles. Each unit has 1 2.5 inch cut square and 1 gray 2.5 inch cut square. So for the B block, we're going to need 32 half square triangles for all of the B blocks. We're going to need 16 red 2.5 inch cut squares and 16 gray 2.5 inch cut squares to create the corner block. Then from there, all we have to do is create the center block. We need 1 4.5 inch red square, 4 2.5 inch gray squares to create the center block, and we have 4 total centers that we need for block B. Okay, so all you have to do is cut 4 4.5 inch red squares and 16 2.5 inch cut gray squares to create the center block. And they each need to be cut 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches in red triangle. And you'll need 2 2.5 inch gray squares to create the wings on the flying geese. Okay, so if we need 4 flying geese units in red, we're going to need 16 total 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch red rectangles, and we're going to need 32 gray 2.5 inch cut squares to create the points in our flying geese. Okay? Then from there, all we need are some strips to complete in the background color, which is red. We need 4 strips 4.5 inches by 12.5 inches, 2 strips 2.5 inches by 12.5 inches, 2 strips at 2.5 inches by 8.5 inches for each B block. So 4 times 4, we'll need 16 of these, 8 of these, and 8 of these in the background color, which is red, to complete the B block. Once you get the A block done, the B block just swims by. It really does. I know I've thrown a lot at you. It is a lot. This one took quite a bit of prep work. And like I said, I've been wanting to do this pattern for a while. And what inspired me was I was looking through one of my old books, and one of them had on display a two-tone antique quilt, and that's what sparked my attention. And I thought, boy, I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to try this pattern, and I'm really happy that I did. I ran out of fabric along the way, so I had to take some of the scraps, and I had to piece some of these squares together in order to get some of my pieces in here, and I'm okay with that. Like I said, this was not a gift. This is going to be for me. I'm okay with that. If this were going to be a gift, I would have stopped right then and there and gone to the store and bought all new fabric to make sure I had enough. But I didn't do that. I just made do with what I had. I recommend getting 5 yards of the red and 4 yards of the gray, just to be on the safe side. And I did, this is going to be a 2-inch finished border on either side, and on top it'll be a 3-inch finished border on top and bottom. So it's just going to be slightly, it's going to be basically square. It'll be just slightly longer. Like I said, it's going to be for my house. I'm not, like I said, if this were a gift, I would have started over and went right back to the store and bought all new gray and all new red to make sure that everything was even as far as the color palette and the design. But it was going to be for me, so it's okay. And I'm using a sheet on the back. Some quilters use sheets, some do not. I have in the past, it doesn't bother me. If you have your quilts long arm quilted, you need to discuss with your long arm quilter if they will use a sheet or not. Some long arm quilters will allow you to, some won't. Because sheets are woven a little tighter, there's different smoothness different textures of sheets, you need to speak with your particular long arm quilter to see what they recommend you use on the back. Okay, because all the machines are all different as well. So there it is. I think I'm going to call this Star and a Starburst. I think that's what I'm going to call it. I think I'm going to call it Star and a Starburst. And this isn't going to be the end. Like I said, I'm going to start a series. I really enjoyed doing the 2-color quilt. The next 2-color quilt I want to do is going to be in red and white. If you do admire old antique quilts, you will find a lot of red and white quilts in history. And I think it has to do with the fact that once we were able to import red was very die fast. I have to look that up and get more information for you. But I hope you enjoyed the process. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, give it a like, subscribe, click the notification bell so that you will get my next video for the next quilt in the series of the 2-color 2-block quilt series. Hopefully it won't take me 3 weeks to put together. This one took some prep work. It really did. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. It took some prep work, but it was a lot of fun, and I like it. I mean, I like it. I like it a lot. So anyway, I'm Angela Davis. I'm the 4M Quilter. Why sleep when you can sew? Have a great night. Here's a little hug from me. Bye-bye.